Hello guys, today I will be talking about speech act theory. First things first, speech act theory is concerned with the ways in which language can be used. It is originated with Austin in 1962 and developed by Searle in 1969. They both believe that language is not only used to describe things, but also it is often used to do things or to perform acts. In other words, actions are performed via utterances, which are generally called speech acts. Austin distinguishes between three acts in one single speech utterance. A locutionary act, the locutionary force which is represented by the speaker's intent. The locutionary act is the act of saying something or the physical manifestation of an utterance. Prolocutionary act refers to the speech act which has an effect on the feelings, thoughts, or actions of either the speaker or the hearer. Those speech acts actually depend on some felicity conditions. In other words, for an act to be performed correctly, there are certain conditions that an act should match. The first condition is called A1. There must exist an accepted conventional procedure having a certain conventional effect. This procedure should include uttering certain words in certain circumstances that are performed by particular people. A2. These particular people and circumstances must be appropriate for the invocation of that particular procedure. B1, which is the third condition. The procedure must be executed by all the participants correctly. B2. The procedure must be executed by all the participants completely. C1. The procedure is designed by people having certain thoughts and feelings. So any person participating in must have those thoughts and feelings, and the participants must intend to conduct themselves. C2, which is the last condition, states they must actually conduct themselves subsequently. Hello guys, today I have decided to make a short video about contrastive analysis, error analysis, and discourse analysis. And also I'll be talking about transfer theory. Contrastive analysis theory develops out of behaviorism, and it is a theory in psychology and foreign language teaching program. It is believed that language learning is accomplished through dialogue memorization, pattern, practice, and rehearsal. Hakuta and Cansino in 1977 make a distinction between three divergent approaches, two of which are directly related. These three approaches are contrastive analysis, error analysis, and discourse analysis. Contrastive analysis mainly emphasizes the similarities and differences that characterize two or more languages. It actually differs from the other approaches in the sense that it does not take the L2 learner as the central focus of its study. Error analysis tries to focus on the L2 learner, aiming at finding the causes of deviation from the L2 norms. Discourse analysis is mainly based on the actual use of speech in L2 in conversations. It analyzes the intended meaning in a conversation beyond the sentence level. The major concern of contrastive analysis is to compare the mother tongue and the target language, not only to expose but also discover areas of similarities and differences. Transfer theory is a technical term denoting the positive interaction of two or more similar areas of languages, resulting in correct linguistic output, which is positive transfer, or denoting the negative interaction of two or more similar areas of languages, resulting in incorrect linguistic output, which is the negative transfer. This basically means that the transfer theory claims that the transfer can be either positive or negative. Positive transfer is viewed when the structure of the first language equals the structure found in the second language, or the L2. As a result, the L2 learner ends up with correct performance because the structure of L2 or L1 has been seen as a facilitating tool in the process of learning the L2. By way of illustration, if an English learner wants to learn French as a second language or foreign language, then it is going to be easier than learning other languages such as Chinese, Arabic, or Indian, because the French grammar is similar to the English one. We can say, Marie plays the piano, or Marie joue au piano. The negative transfer happens when the first language will inhibit the learning of the second language. In this case, the learner will come up with this distorted construction of L2, since they heavily rely on their previous knowledge or competence of their mother tongue. For instance, in Spanish, the adjective is often postponed after the noun. Thus, the errors committed by Spanish learners of English are predictable. That is to say, they will fall in the trap of the negative transfer by relying on the structure of their L1, and by the implication, they are prone to postpone the adjectives after the nouns, as the example below indicate. The lake beautiful instead of the beautiful lake. The towers high instead of the high towers. Thank you for watching.
Hello guys, today we are going to be talking about second language acquisition theory by Krashen in 1982. Second language acquisition theory is a theory of learning that is conducted by Krashen in 1982 and assumes that humans still have the ability to acquire a second language even after the age of puberty. This theory actually contains other 5 hypotheses, and each provides some assumptions towards learning and teaching both a second and or foreign language. The first hypothesis is called the acquisition learning hypothesis, which distinguishes between 2 acts by which one can master a language. The first one is called learning, which is consciously used by learners, and this process usually occurs in formal education. It involves reading, writing, memorizing vocabulary, and so on and so forth, which means that this act is not only difficult to process, but also not sufficient unlike acquiring a language. The act of acquiring a language is much easier since one can unconsciously acquire it via exposing to the input or the context where the target language is spoken. The monitor hypothesis states that learners have the ability to monitor and observe their utterances when speaking, and even they have the ability to correct their mistakes if they make any. Krashen differentiates between 3 groups of learners who monitor themselves. The first group is called underusers, are those who tend to focus on fluency rather than producing correct grammatical sentences, As a result, they make many mistakes in any conversation they are engaged in. Overusers are those who pay too much attention to their grammatical mistakes and tend to have a desire to produce perfect grammar, but they never end up being able to express their ideas fluently, because they interrupt themselves in the middle of the conversation while thinking about the rules of grammar. Optimal users are those learners who know the appropriate time to correct their mistakes in the conversation. This group tends to excel in mastering a language. In short, Stephen Krashen encourages learners to be optimal users of the language. The third hypothesis is called the natural order hypothesis, which implies that learning or acquiring a language or a second language occurs in a predictable order. This is why we find that learners start with learning the very basic structures of language, then later they embark on learning more complex grammar. Take for example, when learners begin to learn English, they first try to use simple present tense, then the present continuous, and next to the simple past, and so on and so forth. Dooley and Burt, as cited in Krashen in 1982, children acquiring English as a second language also show a natural order for grammatical morphemes, regardless of their first language. This clearly exhibits that there are certain inescapable steps that every second language learner must follow. What is more, a second language acquirer picks up language in the same way that a child does, which means that adults' capacity to acquire language, as they did in childhood, does not stop at the age of puberty. The input hypothesis explains how one acquires a language in a progressive manner. A second language performer improves their level in the target language through exposing to the comprehensible input. Krashen refers to this process as I+1, meaning that learners ameliorate their language competence in a natural order whenever they learn new things. By extension, I represents one's current competence, and I+1 means that a learner's knowledge has improved further to the next stage. To Krashen, this is the only way one can acquire a language. The hypothesis indicates that one moves from a stage to the next thanks to the comprehensible input, which means that we can acquire the second language only through understanding messages while engaging with people in conversations. In the context of teaching, Stephen Krashen in 1982 says, "Speech cannot be taught directly, but emerges on its own as a result of building competence via comprehensible input." This quotation indicates that teachers should enhance students' competence by extensively making them understand messages first, then their fluency will automatically develop. The last hypothesis is called the affective filter hypothesis, which illustrates how our attitudes, feelings, and thoughts towards the target language determine how much we are going to succeed in the language. Krashen lists three major factors that obviously affect the progress in the second language, which are motivation, self-confidence, and anxiety. To explain, students who are motivated and self-confident while participating in the classroom tend to excel compared to those who feel shy, stressed, and anxious. This hypothesis reveals that a learner should adopt a low affective filter, which is associated with self-confidence. However, it states that learners should not have a high affective filter which is related to anxiety, because it simply blocks the effectiveness of learning. In other words, one should be open to language in order to have a successful experience while learning. However, in the case if a student is stressed, they simply prevent internalizing the language in the LAD, which is language acquisition device.